Hello, my name is Safari Salmon Mijege from Edukea Tanzania. Welcome in this session to proceed with our topic, which is the second topic unit from 5 history, known as Africa and Europe in the 15th century. So yesterday, on the last session, we ended on the similarities and differences in the field of mode of production in Africa and Europe. So now let us go see the third subtopic in our topic, which is the system of exchange in Africa and Europe by 15th century. So now we are going to start with the system of exchange in Africa during 15th century. It means trade or system of exchange, or in another name we can call it trade. Trade refers to the exchange of goods and services, or buying and selling of goods and services. To mean that trade refers to the exchange of goods and services, or the buying and selling of goods and services. Trade emerged in pre-colonial Africa because no single society could produce all the goods it needed. To mean that trade occurred in pre-colonial African societies because no end society could produce all goods which were needed in the society. Societies produced those goods that they could not produce, that they could produce, and obtain those they could not produce through trade. It means that various societies in pre-colonial Africa produced those goods what they could produce, and obtained those goods which they could not produce through trade or system of exchange or exchange during the pre-colonial era. There were various trading activities in Africa before its contact with the colonialists. It means there was different type of trades or system of exchange in pre-colonial Africa before the contact with colonialists or Europe. There were various types of trade in pre-colonial Africa. These were local trade and long-distance trade. It means that there are two types of system of exchange or trade that was ever happened before the coming of Europeans in African societies. These were local trade and long-distance trade, whereby local trade was the type of trade that was conducted within a given community. It means that local trade was the type of trade that was conducted within the given community or society. The long-distance trade was the type of trade that took place between two or more regions. It means that the local trade was different from long-distance trade, whereby long-distance trade was the type of trade that took place or conducted in two or more regions, and it involved the traveling of long distance. Let us see the long distance trade in East Africa that happened before the coming of colonialists. This was type of trade that took place between the interior and the coastal people in East Africa. It means that this was the type of trade that conducted in East Africa, African people and the people from the coast of East Africa. The main participants were the Baganda, Kamba, Yao and Nyamwez from the interior, and the Arabs as well as Swahili traders from the coast. It means that the long distance trade that was conducted in between the people of the interior of East Africa and the people of the coastal areas were Baganda, Kamba, Yao and the Nyamwez from the interior parts of East Africa, and the people who came from the coastal areas was the Arabs and the Swahili traders. The main types of goods that were exchanged were ivory and slaves from the interior, and the guns, clothes as well as beads from the coast. Mean that the goods which was brought from the interior parts of East Africa was ivory and slaves, and the coast people brought the clothes, guns, and the beds. So these were the main goods that were exchanged or which were involved in system of exchange in long distance trade. Let us see the impacts of long distance trade in East Africa. The first one was formation of states. The long distance trade contributed to the formation of states such as Karagwe and Buganda. It means that in pre-colonial African societies, as they conducted the long distance trade, led to the formation of some states like Karagwe and Buganda in the northern part of East Africa. The trade introduced the guns that facilitated the conquest and the expansion, thus forming states. It means that the long distance trade facilitated the accumulation of guns which were brought by the coastal people or Arabs and the Swahili traders to the interior part of East Africa, and those people got the guns which was brought by the coastal people in order to facilitate the conquest and expansion, and that led to the formation of states. The chiefs who took part in the long distance trade acquired wealth that facilitated the formation of states. It means that the chiefs or leaders who were participating in the long distance trade, they accumulated or acquired a lot of wealth, and that wealth was facilitated in the formation of states. Another was development of towns. The long distance trade contributed to the development of towns such as Bagamoyo, Ujiji, and Tabora. It means that as a result of long distance trade, the towns were developed as these towns were acted as the trading center, so that's why they grown. Towns like Bagamoyo, Ujiji, in Tabora, and Tabora itself. These centers usually worked as a trading center where the exchange of goods, especially slaves, took place. It means that these were trading centers whereby the exchange of goods were taking place, like the exchange of goods, like slaves. When the coastal people brought the beds, guns, and the clothes to the interior people, and the interior people gave the slaves ivory and cocoa and tortoise shell to the coastal people and Swahili traders. These centers gradually turned into towns because they attracted a large number of people. It means that as there was the trading centers, that centers attracted a large number of people to come in that area to conduct the system of exchange or trading activities. Another impact of long distance trade was introduction of Islam. It led to the introduction and the spread of Islam in the interior of East Africa. The Arabs who came from the coast spread this religion. It means that the exchange of the system of exchange or long distance trade that conducted in East Africa led to the introduction of Islamic religion, whereby the Arabs who came from the coast come up with Islamic religion or Islamic believing, and that's why the Islamic religion is spread to the interior part of East Africa. The Islam up to now has a strong influence along the coast of West Africa, where many people become Muslims. The way of eating and dressing depicts the way of life of the Muslims. It means that Islam up to now has got a strong influence along the coast of East Africa, and where many people become the Muslim, and their dressing style and the eating style was the main indicator that depicts that those are Muslims or life of Muslims. Another impact was the development of Swahili language. The development of the Swahili language. This was another impact of long distance trade that took place in East Africa. The long distance trade contributed to the development of Swahili language. The language is some Arabic words that are developed it. To mean that Swahili language has some words which are borrowed from Arabic language. So in one way or another, the long distance trade as the coming of Arabs in the East Africa led to the development of Swahili language. Kiswahili came to be the language used by the merchants over large areas of the East Africa. It means that Swahili language was become the common language that was used by the traders who were participating or involving themselves in trading activities in East Africa. The influence of Swahili in East Africa has widely grown. It means that the influence of Swahili language in East Africa has widely grown. It is the national language of Tanzania, and that led to the contribution of Swahili language to become the national language of Tanzania, because almost the members who were participated in a long distance trade were from the East Africa, specifically in Tanzania present now. Another impact was opening of East Africa to the outside world. It means that the East Africa become known or become exposed to the outside world. The long distance trade opened the interior of East Africa to the outside world. The people of East Africa supplied products that were needed outside. To mean that the long distance trade played a role in opening the interior of East Africa to the outside world or external world. The people of East Africa were supplying the goods and services which were needed in outside. Example, slaves and gold received the products from outside East Africa. It means that the gold and the slaves were the goods which were needed in the outside world. Example, guns and clothes. While in Africa there was guns and clothes that were produced in outside world and brought in East Africa. So the East Africa and external world become in contact, and that's why gave the openness or the accessibility or the openness of East Africa in the external or outside world. The incorporation of East Africa to the outside world contributed to its underdevelopment. It means that the relationship or the contact between Africa and Europe led to the underdevelopment in African countries or in East Africa. Another impact increased the influx of foreigners in Africa. It means that the long distance trade led to the influx of foreigners in Africa. The long distance trade led to the influx of foreigners such as Arabs and Europeans. It means that the long distance trade led to the influx of Europeans and the Arabs. All these were rushing to East Africa to take part in the trade. It means that all people, Arabs and Europeans, were rushing or coming in Africa or East Africa to take the part to participate in long distance trade so as they could benefit and they accumulate a lot of wealth. It was nothing than that these Europeans contributed to the colonization of Africa, and thus the coming of Europeans or colonialists contributed to the colonization of African continent. Another impact of long distance trade was intermarriage. The long distance trade brought the Arabs to the coast of East Africa, who intermarried with the Africans to produce mulattoes. To me, that intermarriage was another impact of long distance trade, whereby the Arabs were married or were intermarried with Africans, and they produced the mulattoes. The mixture of Africans and Arabs, the child who will be born is so-called mulattoes. Another was the participants become rich. It means the participants of the long distance trade were become rich. Those who participated in the long distance trade fully become very rich, especially African chiefs. It means that those people who participated in long distance trade, they became rich because they accumulated a lot of wealth, especially chiefs. Chiefs like Tip and Musili accumulated a lot of wealth from the long distance trade, which was used to build strong states in Africa. It means that those chiefs who were participated in the long distance trade accumulated a lot of wealth, and that wealth that was accumulated really or facilitated them to build the strong states in Africa. After looking at the system of exchange in Africa, let us see the system of exchange in Europe during the 15th century. And the system of exchange in Europe was so-called mercantilism or overseas trade. Mercantilism was started soon after the collapse of feudalism in Europe in the end of or in the last half of 14th century. So mercantilism, we can say that it was started soon after 1500 up to 1750 AD or Anno Domini. Mercantilism refers to an economic system of conducting trade overseas, searching for gold and silver, which led to the commercial revolution, which was characterized with expansion of trading activities. It means that mercantilism refers to the economic system of conducting trade or of exchange. It means economic system of exchange or conducting trade in overseas searching for gold and silver as bullions, which were highly needed in the European societies, and that led to the commercial revolution, which was characterized by the expansion of trading activities or overseas trading activities. Mercantilism was based on primitive accumulation of capital. It means that mercantilism that was developed by the Europeans overseeing, whereby they conducted overseas trades or were moving from their lands to the other parts of the world to accumulate the bullions, characterized by primitive accumulation of capital. That was the illegal ways of accumulating gold and silver was used, like plundering, looting, and the pillage. These were the illegal ways of accumulating the capital. The major participants in mercantile activities were Portugal, Spain, Britain, and the Holland or Netherlands. So these were countries, some of them, these are the some of countries which was participated in mercantile activities or in mercantilism. Portugal, Spain or Portuguese, Spanish, British, and the Dutch. So let us see the features of mercantilism. What were the features of mercantilism? The first one was bullions or bullionism. The policy of mercantilism was based on attracting large amounts of precious metals, gold and silver. It means that the major or the policy of mercantilism was much based on attracting large amount or accumulation of large amount of precious metals known as gold and silver, which was called the bullions of the country. The Portuguese and the Spanish made voyages to Africa and America simply searching for gold and silver that were needed in Europe. To mean that you can see the Portuguese and the Spanish made the voyages where they transported or they sailed the sea from their areas to Africa and America simply to search for those bullions, gold and silver, as they were high in demand in their countries. And the nation or the country or the state in Europe that had a lot of bullions, they were considered as a strong nation and had the stable economy. So the European countries competed in sailing the voyages towards the other parts of the world in Africa and America in order to attain or to accumulate those bullions, which was gold and silver for the prestige of the nation or state. Another feature of mercantilism was expansionism. It means that another feature of mercantilism was expansionism. Mercantilism was based on the belief of conducting commerce overseas so as to acquire gold and silver. It means that the mercantilism policy was based on believing conducting overseas trade in order to acquire gold and silver. It means that the Europeans believed that they have to expand to trade outside of their regions. It means they have to travel from their boundaries to external world or to outside areas in Africa and America in order to accumulate those bullions or precious metals which were high needed or demanded in their countries. It was this policy of expansionism which led to discovering of America by Spanish and Africa by the Portuguese. It means that it was during that era of mercantilism when America was discovered by Christopher Columbus. In New World in 1492, and who was the Spanish person, and Africa was discovered by the Vasco da Gama, who was discovered the East Africa. So this was the whole process of expanding their territories or expanding their area of trading activities in order to search for those precious metals that were high need in their countries, that were gold and silver. Another was protectionism as the third characteristics of mercantilism. It was adapted so as to protect the country's markets through navigation acts. It means that protectionism was the policy or acts and laws which was produced or established by the European countries, specifically Britain, in order to protect the market of their country. Through navigation acts mean that the navigation acts were established or was introduced. The acts were implemented in the late 17th century to protect home markets and ensure enough supply of raw materials. It means that the protectionism policy was introduced in order to defend or to protect the home market from the importers from the importers of external market, so as to ensure enough supply of raw materials in the domestic users. Any country which wanted to sell its goods to Britain or colonies overseas had to use British ships which they had to pay the fee. It means that, for example, Britain was a European country which was strictly established the navigation acts, and those navigation acts or laws were supposedly any European country which wanted to transport their goods to Britain were supposedly to use the British ships. And if any European country wanted to make trading activities with British colonies, had supposedly to use the British ships, and the use of British ships were supposedly to pay fee for the use of the British ships. This was to discourage other countries from trading with her. So this was the policy or method that was aiming at discouraging the other European countries to trade with the Britain or with British colonies and Britain itself. Another characteristics of mercantilism was militarism and the national rivalry or national enmity. Mercantilism was based on primitive accumulation of capital by using methods such as piracy and the plundering. It means that mercantilism was the policy whereby there was primitive accumulation of capital, and methods of accumulation of that capital was usually he used the illegal methods like piracy and the plundering as well as looting. These activities forced the European countries to create strong armies to protect the merchants from being robbed. It means that these activities or these methods of accumulating the capital or bullions, the European countries were decided to establish the strong armies which will protect the merchants while they were on their voyages or on their way. Mercantilism was also characterized by the national rivalry, whereby countries went to war searching for gold and silver. Example, French fought with the British over the control of Canada. It means that not only militarism but national rivalry or national enmity, whereby the European countries become in war contact. It means they conducted or participated in war in order to compete on taking the colonies or taking the control over a certain colony. For example, the French fought with British government or British merchants over the control of Canada. Another was formation of national states or national unification. It means mercantilism was also characterized by the formation of national states or national unification. Mercantilism forced the European countries to form national states. It led to the rise of strong monarchical states that would be able to compete effectively with other European nations. It means that mercantilism forced the European countries to form the national states, and it led to the rise of a strong monarchical state that would be able to compete effectively with other European nations. Britain united with Wales, Scotland and Ireland to form the United Kingdom. It means that the main aim of uniting those small states to become the one nation or big states was aiming to bring the market together. It means the amalgamation of those small states were dividing the market. So their main aim was aiming at to increase or to expand the market, whereby the smaller states will be joined or will be combined to form the strong state. For example, Britain united with Wales, Scotland and Ireland to form the United Kingdom. And another was unequal, or the last characteristic of mercantilism was unequal exchange. Mercantilism was based on equal exchange. The European countries took valuable items of trade such as gold, ivory and slaves from Africa and brought back interior items such as pits and looking mirrors. It means that the mercantilism based on unequal exchange, whereby the Europeans were bringing the priceless or valueless goods like guns, belts, mirrors and clothes, which were exchanged with the African goods which were gold, silver, slaves, and other precious. So after looking the characteristics of mercantilism in Europe, I would like to end up here, and I would like to left the exercise, which is the two questions. And the first question is, to what extent long distance trade impacted African societies in 15th century? And the second question is, explain the characteristics of mercantilism in Europe. So until there, this is mark the end of our today's lesson. I wish you the good preparation, and we will meet on the next session.